who could have passed for an elf dressed in overalls and sneakers, did his best to show nothing of his astonishment at what she had to say and the way she spoke to him, as though she were equal in age and had known him all her life, and as though this situation accorded perfectly with the natural order of things. He told her that Iris had directed him to draw up the necessary papers concerning his responsibilities in regard to Claire, and that he was in the process of doing so. Claire thanked him for taking into account her concerns, shook his hand, took her leave, and left him wondering how any child could be as reasonable, confident, and self-effacing as this one. He'd never come up with an answer. Couldn't even now. No, June wouldn't remind Iris of Claire, but surely her mere presence would disturb. Not that this would be his problem. Duncan had to take Iris at her word, even though he suspected that something he couldn't fathom was behind her decision to shelter a perfect stranger, one with a baby, at Mabel's request. Iris told him only that she could use a bit of help, which he couldn't refute, although it was the first he'd heard of such a thing, and, of course, it made perfect sense to him that, if she indeed needed help, Iris would rather have a stranger from nowhere than anyone from town. For, without ever saying as much, as far as Iris was concerned, no one from town, actually, no one from within a 50-mile radius, could be expected not to spread the word that he or she had actually come face to face with Iris. Duncan knew Iris wasn't wrong. After all, she'd held herself aloof, remained a recluse for so long now that rather than being forgotten, she'd become legendary, both because of her withdrawal from the town and because of the outrageous circumstances of her husband's death. Immediately following his demise and the beginning of her self-imposed isolation, Iris was forgiven, but later, when it became apparent she was going to continue shunning any and all contact with the outside world, at least so far as anyone and everyone knew, she was resented. Except, of course, by Claire, who, vacationing with Iris at Mabel's, had been left behind by her mother of a Saturday morning when her father did not appear as expected and couldn't be reached by phone. Iris borrowed Mabel's car and drove back to her home alone, only to discover his body. Iris didn't tell Claire that her father was dead, just told her there was a problem and that Claire was to remain with Mabel for the rest of that summer, which she did, and then stayed on through that school year while, unbeknownst to Claire, Iris withdrew from local society and hired workers from elsewhere to erect a stockade, Claire's word, around the property's perimeter, then brought in carpenters and cabinet makers, also from elsewhere, to gut and redo the house to Iris's satisfaction, most offensively, in the town's view, removing the windows and door that had looked onto the street and walling in the house's exterior on that side, which was, Claire at the age of 13 later told Duncan, without a hint of criticism of her mother's decision to do so, the outward manifestation, a metaphor if you like, she elucidated, of Iris's resolve to turn her back on the world, which she added, I have to respect. Respect. This, again, was the justification Claire gave Duncan when she announced that she was moving into the cottage to live on her own. You're 13, he'd protested. Well, she responded, her dark eyes holding his. The house I returned to isn't the house I grew up in. The kitchen and dining room aren't where they were. The appliances are all new. Every piece of furniture was removed and, if replaced at all, substituted with mission pieces. What had been my bedroom is now a sort of reading and sewing room. There are French doors that look onto the garden, floor-to-ceiling windows where there were walls, and walls where there were windows. There's a fireplace where there wasn't any, closets where there were none, no closets where they'd been, a pantry that never was, wainscoting with painted walls rather than wallpaper, and